So we want to continue talking about what we mean when we say cause and the starting question of just what does it mean when we say smoking causes lung cancer? Oh, and before I switch to share my screen, somebody asked, so yeah, those are all my baking cookbooks behind me. I like to bake, and in a normal semester, I would have baked treats for you all, but by the time I was thinking about it, I didn't want to share food. Anyhow, so let me get our slides up. Speaking of baking, sort of, we're talking about what's called causal pies. We've been talking about necessary and sufficient causes. The vocabulary we're adding today is the component cause. So just to recall, we're talking about smoking and lung cancer. Smoking is not a necessary cause of lung cancer because some people who never smoked get lung cancer. Smoking is not required for getting lung cancer. Smoking is also not a sufficient cause of lung cancer because some smokers never get lung cancer. Remember, sufficient means guarantees the outcome. So how do we think about it with this language of cause? Well, first of all, let's say that when we're talking about medical outcomes, it's really rare to find a single sufficient cause for a disease. We did have necessary causes. Remember, all our infectious diseases have some infectious agent, the virus or bacteria or parasite or whatever it is that causes a disease. Those are necessary, but they don't have sufficient causes. There's no one thing that will absolutely guarantee that you will get the flu or COVID or whatever it is. There's no one thing that will guarantee that you get lung cancer. So in this medical world, the sufficient cause is a strange thing to be thinking about. I should say there's one exception to this, and that's the genetic diseases. Diseases like Down syndrome, sickle cell anemia, cystic fibrosis, Tay-Sachs disease. There's any numbers of them. These are all diseases or conditions that people get because of some genetic problem, some weird mutation, or in the case of Down syndrome, an extra mutation. So that genetic problem is absolutely necessary. That's the only way you could get sickle cell anemia. And they're also sufficient. If you have that mutation, it's the case of sickle cell anemia, if you have it on both genes, both chromosomes, then you're absolutely guaranteed to get the disease. So genetic diseases are what we call both necessary and sufficient. That was like the last question I asked you about the circles and the triangles. And that's where, in that case, you would color in all the triangles, all the exposed people, and only the exposed people. Exposure is equivalent, is essentially the same as the disease. But that's highly unusual. I said it's really the case for genetic diseases. So how about things that aren't like that? Let's think of all the reasons why we might colloquially say that somebody might get the flu. They need to be exposed to the virus, but there's other things that could lead to them getting the flu if they're not vaccinated, if they didn't wash their hands well, and other various things that might suppress their immune system, like being low on sleep, high stress levels. There's certainly some factors that are just sort of unique to the individual, and I'll just call these unknown or personal factors, and certainly there's plenty more. So these are all different things that might lead to getting the flu. Now, what's going to follow is not as much medical as it is illustrative. So what we could say is there's a bunch of different sets of causes that all put together might add up to somebody getting the flu. Maybe, well, blue is just going to represent our kind of personal unknown, but maybe in addition to the sort of the personal unknown, if somebody is exposed to the virus and didn't get vaccinated and didn't wash their hands, then perhaps all of these together might guarantee that they get the flu. We could say this whole pie might be sufficient if every one of these boxes or these wedges occurs. Now, there could be other sufficient pies. Maybe this in and of itself would do it, but it could also be the case that exposure to the virus and lack of vaccination and being low on sleep, in addition to whatever personal factors are involved, that also might combine to be enough to guarantee that somebody would get the flu. And I could put together another one. Maybe a person was vaccinated, but they were exposed to the virus and they were low on sleep and they didn't wash their hands and they were under a lot of stress. And these together were enough to, plus again, our personal unknown, to depress their immune system to the point where they would get the flu. So the idea here is that these individual wedges are not sufficient, but we're thinking of it as this entire set of causes put together being sufficient to lead to the flu. And we would call these wedges component causes. So that's the rest of this language that people use when they're talking about causes in these medical contexts. So our component causes, just to repeat what I said, not being vaccinated, not washing your hands well, being low on sleep, having high stress levels, are components that when combined together form sufficient causes. And there might be multiple different ways that these combine. So we saw there were several different pies, any one of which was sufficient. That's why these get called causal pies. So taking a look at this picture, are any of these wedges necessary causes? Take a look just at this picture and respond on the form. Right. Being exposed to the virus is a necessary cause because it appears in every single wedge. It absolutely must happen in order to get the flu. So just to recap our language, what we mean by a cause, a component cause, this is the book's language, it's more formal than mine. A component cause is a factor that contributes towards disease causation. It's part of one of these causal pies. A necessary cause is a component that is required to cause a disease. And a sufficient cause is not just one cause, but rather now we're thinking of it as a group of causes, some of them component and some of them perhaps necessary, that all put together inevitably produce our disease. Now, oops, I'm kind of getting in the way here. What do we have to do to prevent disease? Because that's often our concern. If we want to prevent disease, do we need to solve all of the causes? Take a look at these wedges. Do we have to address all of hand washing and lack of vaccination and exposure to the virus, plus trying to get at this sort of personal unknown? Do we have to address all of those to prevent flu for this person? Think about that and respond on the form. Well, what if we just addressed one? What if we can't prevent exposure to the virus? Let's just put that aside for now. But what if we vaccinated everybody? So if we came along and we made sure everybody was vaccinated, would that prevent disease? Would that change the number of people who got sick? Again, give me a response on the form. This will probably be pretty quick. Oops, I'm sorry. I went forwards too quickly. I clicked. Hi, welcome back. If you get everybody vaccinated, then two of these pies won't happen. You just won't have it be the case that this pie occurs. I'm trying to put an X through that. I'm not sure how well that's working. And this pie will also not be satisfied because these wedges won't happen. So the people who were going to get the flu by satisfying this pie, if we get everybody vaccinated, they're saved. And the people who would get the flu by satisfying this pie, if we get everybody vaccinated, they're safe. This pie would still be a pathway for getting the flu. This could still happen, but we would prevent cases of the flu for these people, or people who were not high on stress wouldn't end up getting the flu. So when we're talking about causes like this, oops, and now my annotations have stayed put. There we go. Sorry about that. Still figuring out how Zoom works. When we're talking about causes like this, necessary causes like exposure to the virus, if we can prevent that alone, then there's no more disease. And this actually worked once at a global level. We have eradicated smallpox. Nobody, well, there are a few vials of the disease left in storerooms. But aside from that, there is no smallpox bouncing around in the world, so nobody should ever be exposed to it ever again. That's a huge deal. But necessary causes are not the only way to prevent disease, which is good because when we think about all our diseases like lung cancer and heart disease and all of those sorts of things, they don't have necessary causes. They have component causes. When we think about those component causes, we don't have to prevent all of them to prevent disease. We only have to prevent some. Every time you prevent one, you prevent some of the circles, some of the causal pies from getting filled in, so you reduce the number of cases of the disease for the people for whom that pie was their pathway. Just want to summarize this a little bit. This is, again, some kind of more formal language. What do we mean by cause? A cause is an event, condition, or characteristic, those are our wedges, or some combination of those factors, those are our pies, that play an essential role in producing an occurrence of the disease. It's obviously kind of philosophical and perhaps a little hard to understand, but I'll put it out there. Sometimes we also like to talk about the counterfactual, and this is a method that I like to use, where cause is something that makes a difference in the outcome when it is present compared to when it is absent, when all else is held constant. And this is a lot like our confounding factor story. This says, if the only thing you changed was smoking, if people were exactly the same, except some people smoked and some people didn't, then you would see more cases of lung cancer among the smokers. And that's one way of saying smoking really does cause lung cancer. Okay, oops, I just went back to the beginning. Sorry, I've kind of jumbled this up a little today. That's the end of this video. Thanks, and when you come back, we'll talk more about how people show that we have a cause. Well, that was a mess. Zoom. That one was a little bit of a mess, but so be it.